funny. I never been on the committee. Okay.
Timothy Leary.
Sure.
Excuse me, sir. The panel's about to start. If you could talk to him later, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, wow.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Still. Hi, I'm John Griffin. I'm the faculty director for the Conference on World Affairs. And just briefly, before this session begins, I wanted to take a moment to share with you why I work for the conference and why I support the Conference on World Affairs financially. And one of the reasons, among many, is because we have panels like this, which you're probably not going to find anywhere, any place in the United States. A wide variety of sessions that you can expose yourself to topics that are way outside your normal area of interest. So I'm sure many of you feel the same way about the great sort of eclectic nature of the Conference on World Affairs. So I hope that you'll join me in supporting the conference this year. There's a number of ways that you can do that. You can do that through the CWA app on your phones. You can do that through our website. Or when you're departing today's session, our session ushers or producers will be in the back with donation envelopes that you can take home and send in. So I hope that you'll give what you can, and I hope that you enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Good morning. Today is Thursday, April 13th, 2017. It is 11 o'clock in the morning, and this is panel number 4302, titled Sex with Robots, What's Not to Like? My name is David Spiro. I'm a product marketing manager for language services for SDL Corporation. I'm also a mentor here at the University of Colorado. During this session, we're going to be utilizing both the CWA app and a note card system to receive questions from the audience. We will not have an open mic as we have in the past. To ask a question in the app, simply select the session and tap live Q&A, and then insert your question. If you're a student, please indicate that you're a student, because I will be giving preference to students for the questions. You can also raise your hand at any time to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers, and they will bring those note cards to me. So that's the way we'll be doing questions. We have an amazing panel here today. I will briefly introduce them, and then each one of them will have up to 8 minutes to give you their thoughts on the topic. First, immediately to my left, is Joe Sexton. Joe has a really wonderful career. I'm going to reduce it to its bare minimum, which is about 25 years at the New York Times, at which point he decided it was time for a bit of a change. He asked to be the section chief for African Studies, for Africa, and then discovered that he was going to have twins, at which point he decided maybe going to Africa wasn't the greatest thing. So he went to ProPublica, where they've won 2 Pulitzer Prizes in a row. Joe.
Thank you. Just to be clear, I think the twins would have had a ball in Africa. It was the armed compound in Nairobi that was the problem.
That sounds fair. Second is Seth Shostak. He is educated. His undergraduate degree is from Princeton in physics. His graduate degree was from Caltech in astronomy. His day job is to look for aliens, and at night he likes dancing with machines. Seth. Next we have Tai Tashiro. His background is in psychology. He is an author. One of the more interesting things I learned about him is that he was a consultant on the project for Watson, on the AI division, on how to choose better partners. Tai. And lastly, and I apologize for having to look at my notes, my memory isn't what it used to be, Karuna Jagger. She is an advocate for breast cancer, wants to hold people accountable, wants to remind people that it's medicine that's going to cure, not just good attitudes. It is a watchdog group that she works, and as a person whose mother had breast cancer and survived, which I was very grateful for, I'm very grateful for her efforts. Karuna. So by an amazing coincidence, they just happen to be in the order of which they're speaking. So Joe, would you like to lead off?
Sure. Good afternoon. Or what is it? Good morning. I was approached on my way in here and asked by one of the organizers, was I talked out? I still have something left, whatever. So I said, yeah, sure. I popped my Viagra, and I'm back out here to talk about sex with robots. Not that I need Viagra. I mean, the twins, I had them at 51. So, right? Actually, had I known about sex with robots, maybe I wouldn't have had the twins. Oh, come on, they're adorable, they're wonderful. So I always approach, this is my second year at CWA, and I always approach each panel with a mixture of excitement and dread. I have to admit, this one was a little weighted toward dread, and they always seem to work out, so God willing, this one will too. But should it devolve into a catastrophe of awkwardness and anger, I will take ownership of the idea. I submitted it as a panel notion, although they edited me a little bit, because I think when I submitted it as sex with robots, what's not to love? And they turned it to what's not to like. Trying to divine something profound about that, but I was a little heartbroken. Anyway, but should you be offended or enraged or whatever, I'm staying with Stephanie and Alan Rudy. They live on Kittrell Court, so should you want to, get your pitchforks, that's where you can find me and launch your protest. Anyway, I can't recall why I actually came up with the idea. I'm sure I was on my iPhone and noodling around. And came across a piece, a think piece, as they say, on sex with robots. I was a little surprised at first, and then quite impressed. I was not aware we'd come quite so far in the development of sex robots. And, it's actually, it might surprise you all as well. They're pretty amazing, or they look so. And I thought, well, I have a great reporter on my staff at ProPublica, Andy Revkin, who's a genius about climate change, and he's always insisting to me to stop pushing me to do stories about carbon emissions, whatever. That's not the point anymore. Climate change is real, it's happening, it's irreversible. The real story is one of adaptation. And that's where you need to focus your energy in reporting. And maybe that's applicable to sex with robots, right? It's gonna happen. It is happening. So how are we gonna adapt, or what are we to make of it? So I started to give it actual genuine thought, although as I Googled around on my iPhone, I started to get alerts that my phone might have been infected because I had been to 4 adult sites in the last 13 minutes, and I'm a technophobe to begin with, but I couldn't throw my iPhone away fast enough. But anyway, so I started to actually be convinced that there might be something substantive to say about it. And I may be deluding myself, but here goes. I began to wonder whether there might, and I'm surely not the first to wonder this, whether there might be an actual public health good, right? Could sex robots take the place of exploited women in the world of prostitution? Would men be satisfied that in whatever satisfactions they're seeking through sex with strangers and paying for it, would they be satisfied with robots? And could that have the public benefit of, limiting exploitation of women, or engendering greater public health because transmission of disease might be limited? Again, perhaps fanciful, but it was a thought that occurred to me. And then I also began to think, as I often do, about vibrators. And they have been a lifesaver for me and my marriage. How much different is it, right? There's some kind of electronically driven instrument, entity that you use to, create pleasure. to satisfy yourself and your partner. So, anyway, I a year ago bought an enormous vibrator for my wife. I didn't know they existed in quite those shapes and sizes, whatever. And I brought it home, and she screamed. And I was like, no, he's going to get the G-spot or some shit. And we spent about 15 minutes kind of like both of us handling it, and weighed about 4 pounds. And so it has kind of sat in its box in the corner of our bedroom for a while. So maybe, electronic or non-human sex toys are not actually the answer for us all. Just to be mindful of the time. So then I thought, okay, maybe here's a thing. Maybe we could legitimately have a conversation about sex with robots as a kind of proxy for the question of intimacy in 2017. And, what is the state of that for us? And, I began to think, well, sex with robots or Tinder, is there a difference? Is there a meaningful difference? If we were dead honest with ourselves, how many of our sexual encounters are blessed or carry with them all of the virtues that we like to cite when we, shy from sex with robots? Oh, well, that would be, desensitizing, and that would be, you'd lack the human touch, you'd, lack that soulful connection that you have in sex, or, are we having those soulful connections in our sex lives? Whether we're, 22-year-old kids on Tinder who swipe right and spend the night with somebody and pretend that they're sort of amused by the familiar jokes with a new partner and get through the night and are on the way to the next. Could you argue that that's fairly robotic? For myself, 57, I crawl into bed at night and, at the risk of some embarrassment to myself and my family, whatever, I'm kind of more attracted to my iPhone. It is, maybe a shame to say so, but I bet if you were dead honest with yourselves, how many of you are shaking your heads a little bit too, right? Sex day in and day out, is it spiritual or is it ordinary? Is it life-affirming or obligatory? So, sex with robots, maybe it's worth discussing the very practical aspects of them, or maybe it's worth using them as a way to ask ourselves some tough questions about our own intimate lives and how vibrant and rewarding and respectful and satisfying they are. There you have it.
Seth.
I was told by the moderators, no jokes. They also are, yeah, but I never make jokes. And they also said I couldn't use the PowerPoint slides, so you won't be able to see the plumbing. And let me also say something else, and that is that, to begin with, there are no robots on this panel, which
That you know of.
if they are, I want the patent rights. Okay, but also to make an excuse here that anything I say here is from the male point of view. And women are, Freud didn't understand women, I certainly don't. And so they probably are going to find this very sexist. But it's just, the limitations, and there are many. Clint Eastwood said, a man has to know his limitations. Well, I know my limitations. All right. As far as I can tell, women are not so interested in sex with robots. I asked my Hauser, the woman half of my Hauser, what about it? Do you find yourself attracted to Robbie the Robot or R2-D2? And she said, well, he's cute, but I don't know about sex, right? And then, of course, I mean, there are a lot of people who, and here at this conference, who claim that they've had sex with aliens, right? And admittedly, that's not consensual, but, men have had, this documented, of course, men have had sex with sheep, dogs, horses, and chickens. And I don't know that it's consensual with the chickens. In fact, I don't even know how that works, but I try not to think about it. But, if you're not attracted to R2-D2, why would you be attracted to a chicken? Okay, so I do think that this is a male point of view here. All right, let me just say that I've said before, there's a guy at Stanford who's just written a book, The End of Sex. But, as he explains, it's not the end of sex, it's the end of sex for procreation. That will be done in a more engineering style, and we've talked about that in some other panels, put in the musical talent and the looks and everything else so that the kid can get into CU, that kind of thing. All right, but if it's, if sex then is only for recreation, then what's not to like, right? Okay, well, so I thought maybe the better thing to do is just write down some advantages and disadvantages of sex with robots, because as Joe mentioned here, also David, that it's, technically feasible and more than feasible. It's already happened, right? If you are the type that want to look this up on your iPhone, you say you have sex with your iPhone, do you have to get a special plan for that? I mean, I don't know how that works. Okay, so I've got some of the advantages and some of the
very,
disadvantages.
very special app.
And a large data plan.
All right. It's like Loveland. I'm not going to go there. All right. That probably offends. Yeah, okay. Here are the advantages. Like Delta, they're ready when you are. Okay. You want them to make noise, talk dirty, look modestly interested. No problem. You just put that into the software, or you just change the input parameters. Foreplay, that was brought up by my houses again, who, by the way, are on Willowbrook, since somebody said where they are. They say foreplay, and I hadn't thought about that, of course, but I'm a guy. So, but it turns out that it's an optional downloadable app, so you can't have it if you need it. Won't pester you about commitment, right? In fact, probably the only thing they'll ask you is, point out the nearest wall outlet so they can go recharge afterwards. Always be happy with your performance. There'll be maybe a little LED scale, and won't light a cigarette when it's over. This struck me. Unlike inflatable women, which have been on the market for many, many decades, unlike inflatable women, they won't rocket embarrassingly around the room if they spring a leak. I don't know how many of you have had that experience, but it's okay. Now, okay. So and also don't expect babies, right? Okay, that might be an advantage. Now, here are the disadvantages. Obviously, little emotional commitment. That may be a plus point for men who think every time you get emotion into a relationship, you really destroy it. Will probably not earn you any bragging rights down at your favorite bar. And don't expect babies. Okay, so those are the disadvantages. Now, all of this is a bit facile. Maybe you don't see it that way, but I think all my comments are a bit facile. That you're biological, and you've been hardwired by 4 billion years of evolution on this insignificant planet to like sex, because those of your ancestors who didn't like sex they don't have any descendants in this audience, right? So it's very simple. It's extremely simple. And as James Garnick pointed out years ago, sex will keep getting better and better and better, because to the extent that it does so, you have more kids. All right, that was at least the way it was. Now, so let me suggest what to me is a better idea than sex with robots, right? And that is this. And this is technically feasible today, by the way. In fact, maybe somebody's already done. You design some equipment for this. It's telesex. Telesex. All right. It's sex at a distance. You strap on the required equipment. I'll leave that as an exercise for the student. You can imagine that and design it. And you have your significant other also strap on the equipment. Then you have a high bandwidth connection, in the way Joe has here, and you have at it, even though you're thousands of miles apart. And you feel what you're supposed to feel, and the other side feels what they're supposed to feel. No robotics. This is, with a human, but you don't have to be, it's very uncomfortable if you have trouble sleeping and so on. You don't have to be in the same continent. It's kind of good. So I think that this may be better than phone sex, although I have to say I'm reserving judgment.
I guess I'll take more of a kind of psychological perspective on this, and I don't have any good answers, but I'll raise some questions, and we can talk about these on the panel here. So it might be helpful to tell you what we know about sex in general from a social science perspective. And most of what we know about sex in psychology has to do with plumbing. And if you think about the sex ed classes that you might have had, you can think about the kinds of diagrams and textbook things you had. Most of it was about what do you put where, or, what connects to what, and these kinds of things. And that's mostly how sex ed goes. But there's a lot more to sex, obviously, than just the plumbing of it. And when we talk about sex with robots, it's a good medium to think about some of the things that make sex gratifying versus ungratifying, and how often we should have it and what purpose that should serve. So one of the interesting things we'll talk about in sex and psychology classes is what's the difference between an itch and a tickle and something that's arousing. Now, if you think about the motion that generates those three different sensations, it can be relatively similar, right? And so what is it that differentiates then in your brain the experience between these three different perceptive states? And that gets you into all kinds of complicated things. And one of the things that gets you into is this idea of emotion and intimacy and connection, which is horribly abstract, but it's something that's really integral to differentiating between something that's pleasurable versus something that might be itchy. And I think when you remove sex from the relationship context, sometimes that's one of the problems you get, is that it becomes very mechanical, very robotic in some kinds of ways, and very unpleasurable. So could sex with robots be something that's a better thing? Well, I visited actually the MIT robotics lab last year, and I can tell you how far away we are from this becoming a kind of ex machina reality. So these are some of the brightest robotic scientists in the world and are on the cutting edge of what's going on in robotics. And it was really interesting, some of the things that they wanted to talk to me about. One of my specialties is social awkwardness. So sometimes people want to talk about how can we make the robots less awkward. And I have some thoughts about that. So one of the things they're struggling with is eye contact. And gosh, how much eye contact should you make with somebody? I get that question from awkward people all the time. I say, I don't know, maybe like 6 or 7 seconds on, and then like break away. And they're like, well, where should you look? I'm like, I don't know. This is somewhere else, the same place. No, probably mix it up a little bit. Now, what if you asked, how long should I look in a partner's eyes if I'm trying to be seductive and arousing? I don't know. I mean, it gets awkward, right? There's making out. Just take something as simple as making out. You don't have to answer, but just keep it to yourself, actually. How many of you close your eyes when you make out, and how many people keep your eyes open, right? And there's a split there. And sometimes, I'm an eye closer myself, for the record, and I'll have my eyes closed and making out, and then sometimes I'm with an eye opener. And so I think they're just sitting there staring at me like, why is this dude's eyes closed? Like, I don't know. It's just what I do. But it creates some awkwardness then, right? And then if you're in a more intimate kind of act, how much eye contact? This is just eye contact, right? There was another laboratory where they were struggling with personal space. They say, how do we make the robots less awkward as far as our personal space goes? So it's about 18 inches in the US. That's what you should maintain if you're just talking to a stranger. And it can amplify it to be a better thing, to feel more intimate if you invade that 18 inches. But it can also make it a hell of a lot worse if you get inside that 18 inches and the person finds you repulsive or offensive or whatever else. And so they were working on real tiny subtleties, like what if if the AI picks up a phrase that the AI registers, the artificial intelligence registers as interesting, how much should the robot lean forward and at what rate to make the other person think that they're human-like? And so they had the robot do that with me. They gave me some interesting things to say. And so I said it, and the robot was totally awkward, But now translate this to a sexual encounter. How close should you be? How tightly should you hold somebody? For how long? And what kind of timing? And so all of this is a really long ways away, and there's dozens or hundreds of subtleties that researchers will have to figure out to make robotic sex something that approaches something gratifying. Now, Seth had this good suggestion for what if it has some human involvement, right? And hot off the press, actually, 2 weeks ago, there was a company that launched a product where on one end, a partner has something, I don't know, kind of like a gaming panel, and it kind of a joystick. And on the other end is a vibrator. And you can, like you're playing Grand Theft Auto or something, just race through this thing and vary the speed and the location, all these different things. And then immediately, like a week later, somebody hacked it. So that's embarrassing. But I think that's another route things could go. Maybe that's a good intermediate kind of thing to do in the meantime. But I think one of the good questions, and this was brought up earlier by some of the panelists, is sex. It can be mechanical, it can be robotic, and that can be okay, and it can be pleasurable. You can find a way to do that. But ultimately, people will be longing also to have the variety of sex where there's some intimacy involved. I think the data would suggest there's very, very few people who would be fully satisfied if just 100% of the time it was this pragmatic kind of let's just get it done sort of sex with a robot. You'd want to feel some sort of intimacy or connection, and artificial intelligence one day might be able to provide that. But once again, we're a long ways from being able to do that. Even if we do that, I don't know if that's a good thing on a broader societal level or not. Just because we can give you something doesn't mean it's good for the broader society. The last thing I wanted to say is that I think there's something interesting to think about as far as sex education when it comes to robotics. And obviously you can't do this in high school or something like that, but you could. One of the things that's happening now with a lot of heterosexual women who are in their 20s, sometimes 30s, is they say sex just is not good. It's more like a WWE wrestling match, than it is an intimate kind of event. And could we provide better training than what people are currently getting online, mostly, right, to make sex a more gratifying and intimate kind of experience?
So this is my first CWA, and my lovely producer host woman comes up to me on Sunday night, the first night of the dinner, and says, "So are you excited? Any questions I can answer? Why am I on the Sex with Robots panel?" So she immediately brought me over to introduce me to Joe, who told me if I have any concerns to Google the issue. Let me tell you, I run a breast cancer watchdog organization. My staff is already somewhat confused about what I'm doing here in Boulder and the Sex with Robots panel. And if I bring back my laptop with that browser history, I don't think so. So, I probably learned as much as the rest of you about this topic because I have not Googled it. And I think that I'm on the panel because I have a basic sex positive approach, and I have 2 girls, and I have 2 nieces, and I have female friends and male friends, and I do care about how we do sex ed here in the US. And I think that there's a lot of different issues that the panelists have raised about the ways in which physical sexual pleasure and emotional intimacy and reproduction can get bundled together. And they each have value and diversity within each of those categories, and sometimes they come together in interesting ways. And I actually think that the fact that we're calling this Sex with Robots and not just masturbation with an expensive sex toy says a lot, because this is not sex. And I think Joe, kind of pointed out at the beginning that so much of sex is becoming robotic, and you've raised the point, Ty, about the ways in which sex can be unfulfilling for many women in the US. And I want to make sure that we're taking cultural ownership of this, because this is really not about biological differences. And being a man does not make you sexist. This is actually about our culture and how we approach human beings. And so I think I've pushed Peggy Orenstein's book, Girls and Sex, on every panel that I've been on. So here it is. Get out your pens and paper. Buy and read Peggy Orenstein's Girls and Sex. It'll help, I think, frame this conversation. So we all know that we live in a culture that objectifies women and sexualizes girls. Sexualizes girls just as they come into puberty. And, you know, as Peggy says, girls are getting these messages from day one that they're supposed to be sexy, they're supposed to perform sexually for boys, but their sexual pleasure is unspoken. And it's true, you know, mainstream media messages really do teach girls and young women that their job is to provide visual and physical pleasure to their partners, and those are really male partners. This is a heteronormative model. And there's no mention of their own desire and pleasure. And it's not, you know, I mean, you look at sex ed and the kind of typical story, it's like the male orgasm is in there and female orgasms aren't. And so here I have a 9 and a 12-year-old, and I live in Berkeley, California, which is, you know, should be kind of the land of alternative sex ed. And I, you know, as my children and my friends' children were, you know, needing the next level in sex ed, you know, what resources are out there? You know, who's reading what? What are some good books? And I was pretty shocked that, do you know this American Girl doll company? So it's, you know, so this American Girl doll puts out a book series. And they have a book called The Care and Keeping of You. And this was recommended as a good go-to. So you look at the diagram, the cartoonish diagram, and very much to the points made previously about, it's all about plumbing when you talk about female anatomy. It's all about, you know, reproduction. But that's not why we're having sex. Most people are not having sex with someone else to reproduce. They're having sex because they want to have pleasure. And so why are we focusing on the ovaries? So you look at this American Girl, what is it called? The Care and Keeping of You. You look at this book, you look at this cartoonish diagram, and you know the pubis is labeled, and you know, I think vulva, and it's labeled anus, vagina. There is no clitoris.
Whoa.
This is real. So if you want to do a direct action, the next thing I have for you, after you write down the name of Girls and Sex and go buy that book on Amazon, the next thing you can do is go and write to this American Girl company and tell them what on earth are they doing. So I'm going to save, because I know I can see the clock ticking over there. Ask me about my immigrant parents' first visit to the PTA class, the PTA meeting about sex ed in my elementary school in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I want to close by talking a little bit about Lars and the Real Girl, because as soon as I started talking about girls and sex, you know, folks are like, yeah, sorry, that was Peggy's book, Sex with Robots. People start going, oh, right, there's a movie, and Lars and the Real Girl. Anybody watch the movie? Yeah, so it's interesting because it kind of flips the script here, right? What Lars is hungry for is emotional connection. He's a guy who, is pretty emotionally damaged after the death of his mother and his father's distance. And so, you know, whether accidentally or on purpose, he somehow orders this lifelike doll online and is treating it as a real human. And what he's doing, he's not having sex with the doll, he's caregiving for the doll, right? The doll's called Bianca. It has a whole biography. It's this wheelchair-bound missionary, half Brazilian, half Danish, named Bianca. So, you know, anybody who knows Lars would be concerned about this. His brother and sister-in-law encourage Lars to take Bianca to a checkup at the family doctor, who, you know, in small-town Wisconsin is also a psychologist, lucky. The doc diagnoses Bianca with low blood pressure, and advises Lars to bring her in for weekly treatments, which basically is going to be his weekly therapy session. And then the doc explains to the brother, this is where it gets interesting to me, the doc explains to the brother and the sister-in-law that this delusion is a manifestation of an underlying problem that needs to be addressed. And he urges the family, and it extends to the larger community, to assist in Lars's therapy by treating Bianca as a real person. So the whole town undergoes this exercise of treating this lifelike doll as a real person. And really the story picks up from there, right? And so that's then what the story is. And ultimately, Bianca dies and Lars moves on to real relationships with real people. And I say this because, you know, my personal view is actually sex and robots is, again, not an issue, right? That's a fancy sex toy. The issue is, so it's not about platonic versus non-platonic use of a lifelike doll. We know that Lars's emotional problems is really, you know, his emotional attachment. That's where the problem is. But if we do have concerns about any aspect of sex with robots, we have to recognize that it's not about the robot itself. It's about our underlying attitudes as part of larger cultural and individual issues. And so I'm going to close with a provocative hope that if we involve robots in this at all, maybe we can use the robots to dismantle patriarchy and misogyny.
So before we start questions, I want to acknowledge that this is a topic that both has incredible opportunities for humor, as you've already seen, but also for a lot of thought. And I'm going to be choosing questions for sort of a mixture. I want to start off with a question for the panel, though, which is, at least in my experience, having been told I was going to be moderating this panel, first thing I checked out was Westworld, and my observation, at least in popular culture, when you have sex with robots, is the emphasis seems to be on, well, here's an opportunity for me to live out these fantasies where I am basically being abusive. And I'm curious, what you feel sort of, what does that do to people if they have this opportunity does this allow them to work out fantasies so everything will be fine, or does it mean, they now are going to be more aggressive outside of that environment as well?
Well, I'll kind of kick it to panelists who will speak more authoritatively on this, but it was one of the first things that I encountered when, doing my awkward Googling or whatever, was a very serious, pushback against the idea because of a worry about promoting, rape culture or that what sex with robots would really obliterate would be the issue of consent, and that may well be what men are truly seeking, whatever. And there is I can attest to its full size and sophistication, but there is a campaign underway, if against sex with robots on this very issue. That there would be a real potential menace to it, that it would, validate, confirm, ramify, worsen the genuine threat of, men not particularly interested in the issue of consent.
Yeah, I wonder whether to begin with, there's a panel that's going to be in this room right after this one about Westworld. So I don't want to say anything about Westworld, but it is, it's unclear to me that if you have some way to be aggressive with a sex robot, until of course they decide they don't want that, right, that's actually harmful. Because it's sort of like the argument about pornography. And you say, no, pornography incites men to, mistreat women. But I'm not sure that, are the data supporting that? Or does it in fact reduce the aggression against women? So I think that before you say, sex with robots might be a bad thing, somebody ought to do the experiment.
Yeah, I think a lot of times with technology, one of the things that's emerging from the data that we do have is that it's, I'm not saying this would be the case for sex with robots, we don't know, obviously, yet, but oftentimes it's the case that most people are relatively unaffected. They can differentiate okay between reality and what would be, I guess, fantasy in this case. But there is a significant concern for usually people who are at some far end of the bell curve, let's say it's in the lower 5th or 10th percentile, who do have a hard time distinguishing reality from fantasy, and who do maybe already have violent inclinations. If you take something like video game violence, for example, it's not a big deal for most kids, but for this proportion of kids who are already disposed a bit to have violent attitudes, it makes them worse. So I do think it is a very real concern, and there would have to be some forethought into how to mitigate that.
And I'm basically going to say the same point that I made in my comments, which is that our robots are a reflection of our fantasies and of our culture. And so, you know, to me, what then becomes interesting is like, you know, what are the normative programs that get programmed into robots, right? Like, how do we normalize certain kinds of behaviors? What are the representations of the robots? How do those get left out? And it's really not about robots. It's about video games. It's about media. It's about pornography, but it's about all kinds of things. I mean, like, the truth of the matter is, you know, we have a problem with older women in Hollywood, right? Like, the representations of women across the board are so just far removed from the diverse realities of women's lives and bodies and wants and desires, that robots are just a tiny piece of this. And it's sort of I don't know, a fun thing that we can grab onto, but this is really about our culture, you know, across the board.
Can I just ask, how many in the, I know you won't volunteer this, but how many of you would sort of cotton to the idea of sex with robots? Okay, let me change the question just slightly. How many of you find it appealing, or find the following idea appealing? Going to the drive-in with a robot and, you know, making out with a robot? You see, there's some difference there, because making out is more about the emotional satisfaction than just having sex.
Well, I'm going to keep saying it's not having sex, right? You're masturbating. It's a robot. You're not having sex.
Well, that's, yes.
Okay, small point. No. Yeah. No, it's actually a great point, and I will say that my interest in this topic dates to about 2 weeks ago. So, but even in that brief, you know, and borderline criminal exploration of it, you know, I have yet to see a male robot as the likely sex partner. Everything I have seen has been a female. Which has to be telling.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I might say related
yeah,
to that.
gay men aren't interested in sex at all.
Yeah. You know,
That's why there's no men.
I think
Wait, why?
I'm, you know, lots of people might want to have sex with male robot, or not masturbate with male sex toys, let's say.
I think that's true, and you know, I also think it's the case. Who's designing these? You know, this is something we don't always give a lot of forethought to. Is who's actually going to design these robots and who's going to engineer them and think about the ethical issues and all these other things. And I can tell you right now who it is. It's mostly men.
Shocking. I
Sounds
have
like
a
it's
question
mostly
from a
straight
student that I particularly like. In a world with AI advanced, you know, that robots are starting to have consciousness, how should we program a sex robot, and at what point do we need their consent?
Do you need consent from your iPhone? No, it's a robot. You do not need consent. This is not sex. You need consent for sex. This is a sex toy. It's masturbation. You use your iPhone. You have a password. Same with the sex toy.
Yeah, but I think there is a point here, and that is the machinery you build today is not self-aware. It doesn't know of its own existence, and that's the reason we don't have robots on the panel here, right? Okay, but that's not going to stay that way forever. That's the point. It will have awareness. I mean, that's, again, Westworld, but that's what's going to happen unless you think that consciousness is some sort of miracle that can't be replicated in hardware. And a lot of people do think that, but I think they're wrong. I believe they are wrong. So if the robot now knows of its own existence and then decides that, you know, there's some things I'd like to do better than other things, then, of course, it's, in a sense, not the kind of robot we've been talking about. And if you're really the futurist and you say, you know, our future is to upload ourselves into the machines, I'm not so sure I buy that myself, but there are a lot of people who have talked a lot about it. If you get uploaded into a machine at some point, then with whom do you have sex? Software? No, sex with software. We could have a panel.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the best way to, if we're just talking about programming, you know, the best way to do it would be to observe millions of people having sex with some robot and then let the AI figure out the patterns, just to be totally technical about it. But, you know, think about this, though. Do you want all your data, even though they say it's secure? How many times have we heard that, right? and it get posted to WikiLeaks or something like that. Everybody knows, 1, 2, and 3, like kind of how you. Yeah, so I think it's a real challenge.
So
I think that already happened. Wasn't there a vibrator where it turns out that the company was,
Yeah, it was the joystick
yeah,
vibrator. Yeah.
right.
Wait, what were they doing?
I think this was the joystick.
Yeah, there was that. Your one partner's got the joystick, and then you
Right.
got the vibrator on the other end.
To point out the obvious, you know what the etymology of joystick is? I mean, well, I figured everybody knew that it's a stick between the legs of the pilot in an aircraft. I'll let you fill in the rest.
So, to me, Karuna makes a very, very good point. Certainly with the way it is now, sex with a robot is masturbation. But there's another ethical issue that comes up from somebody who asked the question with, okay, so this seems fairly harmless, but what if, somebody wants to buy a robot that looks like a 9-year-old boy?
Oh my God, they're getting us in the mood. What's happening?
I'm a little concerned of what music is about to come on. I don't know about you guys. Okay.
God is not happy.
Apparently, no, she isn't. Anyway, how do you answer that?
What was the question?
So the question was, whether you consider it to be, masturbation or not. And for the time being, I'm sort of going with that with where they are now. Is it ethical to allow somebody to buy a robot that looks like a 9-year-old boy?
The robots have to be 18 or older.
I think I'm supposed to move on to the next question. All right. How might we use robots to dismantle, patriarchy and misogamy?
Well, I think that's for all of us to figure out. I want to start out by saying, this is important to me. It is the job of each and every person in this room, including you, Seth, to dismantle misogyny and patriarchy. Patriarchy harms not only women, it harms men, and it is our collective job to work together to figure this out. If robots play a role, perhaps it's by challenging norms and, helping us to break through, some of the harmful stereotypes and oppressions. I don't know the answer. Thankfully, I'm not, doing this alone. This is all of our project together.
And I think could make the argument, and this might sound self-serving since the panel was my idea, but maybe this very discussion about sex with robots is a modest, step, even if it's just from the fact that you've been able to hear from Karuna, towards recognizing the challenges and the obligations that go well beyond robots and to our very relationships.
I don't know if I should defend myself. I'm not sure what I did, but whatever it was.
You just said the male perspective was inherently sexist. That was what I heard in your.
Well, that's not misogyny. That's misanthropy or misanthropy, or how do you pronounce it? Misanthropy. Yeah. No, look. I mean, I don't know that it can cure that problem. It's like saying, suppose we could, develop a chemical compound next week that cures male pattern baldness, right? Is that going to help in men's relationships with women? Maybe it is, actually, when I think about it, but I don't think so. I mean, I think that's an important problem, and it's a much bigger problem, and I don't think that the robots are going to help much. It's just me, but.
I mean, I think the procedures are actually, interesting if you think about like logging in, for example. I don't think we should underestimate how much impact some of these repetitive procedures can have. If you take, for example, fighter pilots, right? In the Air Force, our fighter pilots have gotten much better. And why? Because they play a lot of video games, right? And the skill transfers. My little nephew, when he sees me, who's 3 years old, has talked to me on FaceTime so much that and maybe this is sad, but the first thing he does is he reaches his finger towards me, which is really sweet, but kind of sad too at the same time. So some of these repetitive things that we have with technology, I don't think we want to automatically underestimate that there's not transferable value in building these into the software and how the even consent, for example, takes place with even it's a robot, but let's not underestimate that could be a value.
So I kind of like this one because there's another theme for those of you who've also seen these various movies about these about sentient robots. The two themes I see repeated over and over again is our desire to be abusive to them because we can. I'm sorry. So themes that I that I tend to see is that people seem to want to be abusive to the robots. That's a common theme. And the other one is prejudice against the robots. Really, making them our image of hatred because of the things that we do to them. I'm curious, as robots get more consciousness, as people use them for more reasons, do you think there's going to be more prejudice towards robots?
Who asked that question in the audience? Can we have eye contact with anybody?
I think over here, Seth.
Okay. Prejudice against robots. My panelists have something to say about that.
I'm apparently not as good at choosing questions as I thought I was.
No, no one should, and you should feel bad about asking the question. I have no doubt that there's actually a thoughtful contemplation possible about that. It just may be a little hard to do, seat of the pants.
Yeah, as long as they're not self-aware, I think there's no more danger of prejudice against robots than there is prejudice against automobiles, right? I really don't like those Hondas, right? There isn't a whole lot of that. So, but at the point where they become self-aware, right, then of course they have all the same problems that humanity has.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah, that's where I was going. Folks have some really strong feelings about their Androids versus their iPhones. You can kind of split the world in two.
Sort of a follow-up to that is a student writes, the movie Her touches on the idea that when AI is capable of emotion and human level, that AI, will be capable of emotion and human level thought. Once AI reaches that point, does that make sex with robots more acceptable?
Well, I have found sex with robots already acceptable, so that would just be added value.
I don't know if there's a distinction between right or wrong necessarily there, at least in my mind, but I do think there's a distinction in the amount of pleasure it could provide or gratification it could provide. I mean, the amount, it's an endless amount of possibility. Like if you're trying to decode someone else's emotional state as a human, you're just trying to guess from their facial expression mostly, a little bit from their body language and tone of voice. That's almost all that you got. What if you could see their heart rate? You had a chart in your mind about where that's going. You could see how much their palm is sweating. You could see the neurological activity in their pleasure centers versus their disgust centers, right? Imagine if you could have all of this data available. Now, not all of that's available already, but a lot of it is through technology. And the machine could use this to actually zero in on an extremely accurate, time-sensitive, emotional reading of where you're at.
I do think this is getting a little bit bogged down, but because there's this radical idea that no sex with robots today, but 2 years from now sex with robots. This is a gradual progression, and it isn't just about sex, right? I walked into a guy's office at the Singularity University last week, and he had a little robot that's sitting there, and all it didn't do much. It was just a small thing about the size of a dog, but it looked like a human. But it was a cute human. It had big eyes and a very small mouth. It was like a kitten, right? And as soon as you walk in the room, it starts looking at you. And you look at it, and then it looks away for whatever the number of seconds is that it's supposed to, right? And then it comes back and looks at you. It never said anything, right? Okay, but it's very appealing. It's another presence in the room. Now, if you go to the MIT Media Lab, you've been there, right? They're working on making robots that can help you if you're in the hospital, right? Because you might not see the nurse for another 4 hours, but this comes in as a companion, right? Big-eyed, it's paying attention to you. You've read about these things, so maybe that's the bigger game changer in the near term, that you have somebody in your home, something in your home, right, that keeps you company if you're old and alone, or if you're just sick, or you just want somebody else in the home besides the teenagers, that maybe you have these companion robots. So that's something that's going to happen. And we can sit here and argue about, is it good? Are we going to abuse the companions and all that? But, this is a very gradual thing. And sex is just one aspect of it, and maybe not even the most important aspect, because maybe the most important aspect is that it, does the dishes and makes the beds.
Yeah, this is interesting, this idea of a companion robot, right? Like, there is a difference between a companion pet, which is not human, where you can have an emotional attachment that's reciprocated. And we're saying I'm talking about replacements to human companionship, right? So, people in hospitals, older folks, not getting enough human touch, not getting enough human companionship. What's the remedy? So we know that there are studies that show the value of pets and dogs, right? I'm not willing to say that a robot is a companion. I'm just not willing to go there. I feel very clear that that relationships are reciprocal, and that you can get robots are still in the category of iPhones, right? The way we're attached to our iPhone is like, oh my God, I lost all my contacts. Oh my God, nobody can text me anymore. It's an attachment, but it's a one-way attachment as a tool. And I just am not willing to say that big-eyed robots are companions. It's not a relationship because it's not alive and it's not reciprocated. And I'm going to take this back to the sex piece, because I actually think that the failure to see that and to focus only on self and one's own experience and not think, outside of one's own experiences is part of the problem with what's going on with sex.
But I
it's
wouldn't let.
Entitled. It's
Do you really want to let the better get in the way of the good? Because it would be much nicer to have somebody by your bedside there in the hospital, but you can't afford that. And so are you going to say, because I can't have the best solution, I'm not going to go with an intermediate solution? And I think that if you're a patient in a hospital 10, 20 years from now, or living alone or something, you may, in fact, really enjoy that mechanical, I don't want to say mechanical pet, but
Right.
yeah, that companion. I think you really are going to like that.
One thing, because I am, like it or not, Catholic, or as I like to say, a collapsed Catholic, there's still enough in me to want to be, self-hating. And, I would love, to the extent that there's a tangible good to come from the conversation, is that, each rebuttal, if that's the right word, of the notion of robots, whether they're companions, sexual partners, whatever, each legitimate, even persuasive argument against flows only from our own personal ability to meet the requirements of, that related. So that when we say, well, I will refuse to, see a robot as a companion at home because it's supposed to be reciprocal and whatever, is a totally legitimate and probably persuasive for me argument. But only if we meet the requirement of that reciprocal relationship
Yes.
ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
And I do think whether it's sex or companionship or whatever, it is, and it doesn't have to be self-hating, it can just be self-challenging, is to say, how often are we meeting that ideal that we combat properly or not the notion of a robot in our own conduct?
I'm seeing a couple of themes, coming up here, and the two main themes that I'm seeing, one is the mechanical aspect of it, and the other also, talks about, the artificial intelligence and, where it can be, helpful. And I think this last part of the discussion was particularly interesting on things like, like companionship. Obviously, if we can be there for our fellow person, that's wonderful. If we can't, having something that at least emulates it, is a pretty good thing.
See, you start talking about companionship and all the kids leave.
I like your
What
interpretation.
the fuck, man? Come on, stick around.
Whoa.
We like you.
I like his interpretation better. I always thought it was because I started speaking. very intimidating. But, I was thinking in terms of sort of the machines that we have today that have replaced people. And if I am paying my credit card, I love being able to have the machine where I just give the information, boom, it's over, it's done, it's this pretend human being. But if I'm trying to report a problem, this drives me crazy because I want to be able to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of curious, to continue this conversation we've been having a little bit in terms of, as consciousness gets better, where is it good? What are the lines between saying a machine can, help me out, whether it's sexually or otherwise, as they get more conscious? Ty.
Well, I think if it's a truly intelligent machine, and if it's getting smarter over time, which is what they'll do, they'll start to expect that the relationship is fair, unless you program it in to have them be, programmed to just be totally subservient. But it'll want to be fair, and then it's going to pick up on that. It's going to start demanding fair and equal behavior from you, and that's an unintended consequence I think a lot of people don't consider. I think the other thing that's kind of come up that I think that's really interesting is, if it's AI, it's going to be totally rational, and I think probably sex with a totally rational person would not be great. Like someone, there's like a certain. Not to get weird about this, but I think there's like a certain art to it, right? There is just random things that happen. You're like, whoa, what was that? I didn't see that coming. And in fact, if you look at couples that have been together for, quite some time, one of the issues that pops up a lot of times is boredom, right? Because it's the same damn progression, every single time, same positions, whatever. And so you actually rely on random error. You actually rely on imperfection to make the sexual experience gratifying.
Yeah, but you could program that in.
You could, yeah, and in fact, that's a little
fact, on my phone, I
every
think
now and
they
then
have.
with you.
Joe, you have anything to add to that?
No, I just sort of see my entire sex life as a random error.
Realize the entire career of one-line comedians I think goes away with sex with robots, because you can say I went to have sex with my robot last night. It said not tonight. I have a headache. It's just not as funny. Let's see. I had an imaginary friend as a child. How different really would be a robot companion in my future?
Well, I don't know.
Hey, I'm reading
Actually,
these
that actually touches me.
Yeah.
I'll just wing it. But the imaginary friend as a kid, I suspect, was filling a need that wasn't being met, whether that's unquestioned loyalty or imagined understanding. And if you want be turning to a robot to fill a need, not entirely unlike the imaginary friend as a child, it's all about understanding what is the need that isn't being met. And once identified, working to fill it.
I don't think there's actually, this is a good point, because, kids have dolls, or they have playmates that are totally synthetic. They don't have any AI, and yet they're people to them, right? And you could say, no, you ought to give them real babies to play with. I don't know, they probably couldn't do that, but I don't think anybody thinks it's harmful. And what was the Japanese dog, the first one? It began with an A. Anybody know? Okay. What was it? Yeah.
Is it a Furby?
No. It began with an A. I don't know. My niece had one of those. She just loves dogs. She loves dogs, right? And this was not a dog. She knew it wasn't a dog, but she talked to it. She took care of it, and so forth and so on. And is that harmful behavior? I don't know. I don't think so. Dog didn't seem to mind either.
Mm-hmm.
Right, as long as we're all recognizing that play is an important part of life, right? And so if we're treating this as a toy that we play with in new and novel ways, no problem. But if you treat it as a replacement for human relationships, then we have a problem. It can be a great, addition to life, but it can't replace the value of human relationship.
And that's actually the biggest concern I see when I look at these questions. The one that comes up time and time again is the fear that this will lead to less intimacy between people. Already I'm amazed when I go to dinner with my friends what slaves they are to the phone, right?
Yep.
Text goes off, you immediately look down. News alert comes through, you immediately look down. So a lot of people are writing in going, all right, how's this going to affect relationships with people? And I think it's a broader question for AI than necessarily just, sex with robots.
I mean, I think it is a concern that there could be declines in intimacy, but I might also say that we're pretty low already. So I don't know how much further, we have to fall, actually. So and let me just be depressing for one sec. But there's really interesting studies they do, decade by decade, and they've been able to do this now for a number of decades, and they can look at things like the number of friends you have, the number of family members you keep in touch with, and that's remained relatively constant, which is kind of heartening, right? Over the past 4 decades, it's about 7 family members, about 7 friends that you're close with, which is great, because you hear about this epidemic of loneliness, but it's more nuanced than that. So if you look at other studies then that ask questions like, is there somebody you can talk to if you have a serious problem? It used to be the case that the majority of people in the United States said yes to that question. Now it's flip-flopped. Only about 40% of people in the US say there's someone they can talk to if they have a serious problem. All these other questions that are related to intimacy have shown that same flip-flop, where now the smaller percentage of people who can have these kinds of intimate interactions and interpersonal relationships. So I think we're pretty low already.
Do you take any heart in the fact that, this is not the first time we've had this kind of a problem, right? 30 years ago, the Walkman comes in, and all the kids are walking around, with earphones on. They weren't earbuds, they were just real earphones, right? And, they're not paying attention to anybody else. They're just listening to their music. But that's been replaced by their phones now, but maybe something will come along, that implantable chip, and you forget the phone, and, you see all the people here, and names appear on top of their heads, little thought balloons, right, wanted for murder or something. So you get kind of thing. But that technology, some other technology is undoubtedly going to come along, and you're going to look back on the phones and say, man, things are great then. Everybody still talk to one another, even with their thumbs.
You look poised to say something. Am I misinterpreting you, or?
I was gonna kind of call a halt, but that's not my role. No, I just feel like we've reached a quite lovely moment. Yes.
We've actually had 3 requests that you tell your story about the PTA.
Okay. It definitely is a sideways step, but I'm going to say that okay. So I'm first generation. My parents are immigrants and native English speaking, but they come from Europe, which is very hands-off about education, right? Like the teachers are the professionals. You send your kids to school, and the teachers do their jobs, and then you bring the kids home. So this helicopter over-parenting, I did not have, and I don't do. So what makes me laugh is the one and only PTA meeting that I believe my parents did over the course of my education was when I was in elementary school. I also, as a side note, asked my parents in elementary school how many grades there were. They didn't know the answer. Okay, that's how hands off. So they go to this PTA meeting about sex ed in Cincinnati, Ohio, public school. And that's why they went, because it was about sex ed. And they, however it was, they ended up sitting separately in different parts of the room. And my father says, well, are you going to talk about homosexual relationships? Like 1970 Cincinnati, no. My mother said, so, meeting goes on. My mother says, well, are you going to talk about the clitoris? And the woman across the aisle, eyes get big, and she says, oh, I don't want my son to know about that. And my mother says, I should hope you do. And the result was no sex ed in my public school. But, that's kind of the unintended consequence. But, you know, it underscores the point that this is just absent from conversations, and it shouldn't be. When we talk about sex, sex is not intercourse. Sex is sharing mutual pleasure with, sexual pleasure with another person or more. And there's a wide range of sex acts that bring people pleasure. And we've kind of created this weird heteronormative penile-centric model that's like a man and a woman falls in love, they get married, a man puts his penis in a woman's vagina, and then they have a baby. And it's this like intensely penile-centric, I don't even know what, it's even worse than just heterosexist, right? It's ridiculous. And I think if we can talk to kids about a wide range of healthy, consensual sexual pleasures, we can talk to kids about emotional intimacy, relationships, how to build connection, and sometimes sexual pleasure and intimacy go together, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay both ways. And then if we talk to kids about reproduction as not just intercourse, right? There's so many ways that families come into being, and so we need to give reproduction its own attention and the diversity of reproduction. And again, sometimes sometimes it's intimacy and reproduction that come together without any kind of sexual act. But we need to give each of these things their own attention in the full diversity that they come.
And I can think of no better way to end our panel. Thank you for coming. Thank you, my panelists.
I asked my mom if I could tell it. My mom's a professor.
Oh, okay.
Probably you can answer.
I can talk about it.
So fabulous.
And my mom was in the audience like last year.